These two seem like a natural pair for a versus video, yet I've only seen one other video with this matchup. That video, which I've linked in the description, is well done, but overlooks something I believe to be critical. I felt Rico Chico Malico didn't properly address the mediums in which the characters were presented, specifically the role BD1 plays in the game mechanics. At the start of the video, Rico notes that BD1 will not be factored in as the fight will be exclusively between Cal and Kanan. Although I think this is appropriate, Rico proceeds to make the comparison without accounting for BD's absence. Nearly every feat Cal accomplished in the Fallen Order game was done with BD's help. For a fairer representation of Cal's abilities, I think a more critical analysis is warranted. This aspect, and various other details I think Rico missed, will be mentioned as they become relevant. As with my previous versus video, the first step must be establishing which version of the characters are being pitted against each other. Rico chose Kanan from before being blinded, but I'll choose him from after, as this event inspired him to rely more heavily on the Force, becoming a more powerful fighter. I will use Cal as he appears at the end of the Fallen Order game, as this is his most powerful state currently, and, I think, the best match for Kanan. I will be comparing Cal and Kanan in 4 broad categories: strategy, martial skill, superpowers, and equipment. This section is far less remarkable than in my last video, as Cal and Kanan are similarly equipped. Lightsabers as a whole have a fairly standard design, thus, though their lightsabers are very different from each other, they have much more in common than unique. Regarding cutting power, blocking potential, and power supply, there's nothing to differentiate these weapons. Although different crystals and lenses are used, even the most die-hard Star Wars fans would agree that the blades are roughly equivalent. The differences come in their hilt designs. Kanan Jarrus's lightsaber follows the standard two-handed design with an adjustable blade length. It has a disc-like guard similar to the tsuba of a katana, but I've encountered no evidence to suggest that it could block a lightsaber. Cal Kestis's second lightsaber is a split saber. That is, a double-bladed lightsaber which can be split into 2 single-bladed lightsabers. This gives Cal 3 possible forms: a single-bladed lightsaber, a double-bladed lightsaber, or 2 single-bladed lightsabers. Without a doubt, Cal's saber has more options, but I disagree with Rico and most Star Wars commentators in that I don't believe more equals better. From what I've read and in my own experience in martial arts, a weapon which can do one thing really well is just as good as a weapon which can do 3 things really well. It all depends on what needs to be done. Combination weapons were very popular for a period in history. That's where crazy things like this hammer gun were made. And yet the popularity of most of these weapons died out. In the modern day, you'll not find a single hammer gun still in use. Why? The extra weight of putting a hammer on a gun is too high a cost for the benefit of having a hammer. Maybe a bayonet, which is another type of combo weapon, yet even these aren't universal. A gun really only does one thing, but it does it well enough that there's no need for add-ons. After all, sometimes combining weapons makes inferior weapons. Now the gun is too heavy, and the hammer is too delicate. Thus, declaring Cal's saber superior simply because it's multifaceted is wrong. It may be superior, or it may be inferior. So let's give it a closer look. Now, in the real world, a double-bladed lightsaber would be a bad idea. The design is based off of a quarterstaff or bow staff, but the difference between these weapons is everywhere on a staff is safe to touch. The martial art is built around changing grips. It would, therefore, be impossible to use a double-bladed lightsaber as a staff weapon. At the same time, it is also impossible to use this weapon like a sword, as most cuts and blocks would end up killing yourself with the second blade. Thus, whether using it as a staff or a sword, the user would be incredibly limited in what moves he could make. Creating a new martial art around the weaknesses of a double-bladed lightsaber wouldn't work either, as the limited grip space would require limited mobility and the chance of self-harm would limit maneuverability. There would be no way to attack with the amount of finesse or power of a standard weapon. After all, there's a reason no weapon like this was ever invented historically. But I must accept the in-universe logic which insists this weapon allows for greater speed and versatility, though requiring more skill and dexterity. We see this in the game mechanics of Fallen Order, as when switching to double-bladed, Cal's attacks are quicker but deal less damage. This reduction in damage could be explained by Cal needing to strike more cautiously, as the martial art is more complex. How, then, does this translate to his duel with Kanan? Kanan has managed to fend off both single and double-bladed attacks in his fights against the Inquisitors, and as he even defended against the Grand Inquisitor, who is doubtlessly stronger, faster, and more skilled than Cal, I don't see either form of the weapon catching him off guard. As for using two sabers, Kanan has demonstrated greater mastery of Jarkai fencing as he fought the Grand Inquisitor for an extended period using this style. Cal, on the other hand, is only able to manage brief strikes in this style, interspersing them into his other forms. Although it's true that Cal may surprise Kanan by switching between forms, it is equally true that Cal could waste his time switching styles. If you spend too much time trying to match the perfect style to your opponent, you may just lose to the guy who's spending all his time just trying to hit you. Plus, when you have options, you can choose the wrong one. When you only have one option, you make it work as best you can. In short, Cal's weapon could be a disadvantage as easily as an advantage. It all depends on how he uses it. But equipment doesn't end with lightsabers, as Kanan uses a blaster and wears some armor. This armor is never said to be able to withstand a lightsaber, but it could protect against any punches. As for the blaster, Kanan demonstrates he is very skilled at integrating blaster fire into his dueling, yet he rarely uses this technique. In fact, his use of a blaster became rarer as time went on. The advantages gained by armor and blaster are so slight that they're hardly worth mentioning. But as Cal's lightsaber isn't inherently better than Kanan's, they're enough to end this stalemate and win Kanan the edge for equipment. Once again, we have very similar sets of superpowers, as both Cal and Kanan are Jedi and contemporaries. Both are humans, so have no superpowers beyond their connection to the Force, and both received incomplete training and spent considerable time hiding their abilities. Unsurprisingly, both display only basic Force abilities and have at times struggled even with these. Still, there's a lot to unpack, so let's start with Kanan. Originally called Caleb Dune, Kanan was briefly trained by Jedi Master Deepa Billaba, but she was killed when Caleb was 14, putting an immediate and permanent end to his formal training. In the years to follow, Kanan strove to hide his Force abilities. He used more passive abilities, such as greater awareness, reflexes, speed, and strength, but was otherwise unpracticed until he revealed his identity as a Jedi 14 years after Bilaba's death. From that point, Kanan had ample opportunities to test his abilities, and even received guidance from Bendu and other mystical presences. Yet it is still very accurate to say his Force abilities are underdeveloped and unrefined. Kanan demonstrates many abilities typical of Jedi, including telekinesis, super jump, precognition, and quickened reflexes. He was considerably resilient, resisting torture for days and even being stabbed in the back and still fighting. He also was rather strong, clotheslining armored troopers and holding on to Fen Rao's ship. He seemed also to heal somewhat faster than a typical human. More impressively, Kanan seemed especially gifted at detecting other Force sensitives, to have some mastery of beast control, to resist mental torture, and on occasions, he could trust himself entirely to the Force, allowing for greater power and control. The best descriptor for Kanan's abilities is inconsistent. To be sure, he has incredible raw power. He's able to move faster than Maul, hold up cave-ins, and contain massive explosions. And yet, other times he struggles with significantly weaker opponents. It's only in moments of extreme crisis that Kanan is able to use the full extent of his power. But this crisis has to be something extraordinary, as the threat of death, failure, and even his friends being in danger is often not enough to trigger his extreme power. Kanan lacks focus and commitment. If he can run, he will. Cal Kestis was 12 when Jaro Tapal, his master, died in the Purge, making him just 2 years younger than Kanan. Cal reacted differently to the trauma of losing his master, as his bond with the Force was damaged, greatly reducing his abilities. Though this made hiding his powers easy, he still managed to draw the attention of the Inquisitors after just 5 years. His story would have been much shorter if not for the help of former Jedi Master Ser Junda. Whatever else may be said of these two, it is clear that Kanan was better at avoiding detection. He wasn't known to be a Jedi until he revealed his identity. After his escape, Cal began healing his connection to the Force under Ser's guidance. In a short time, he managed to regain all his lost power and even form a stronger bond with the Force than he had when Jaro Tapal died. Cal was proficient in telekinesis, had enhanced reflexes, and super jump, speed, and strength typical of a Jedi. Regarding his rarer abilities, Cal was especially gifted in Force stasis, able to slow multiple targets at once as a child. He can direct projectiles as he does when throwing his lightsaber, and has psychometry, though this has no direct combat applications. Comparing the strength of these two Force wielders is deceptively tricky. With a cursory glance, Cal's abilities seem the obvious choice. Although he's never accomplished any feats on par with Kanan's greatest, his average abilities far outstrip Kanan's. Cal can consistently push multiple targets at once, even throwing large creatures with ease. But we have to consider the medium these characters are presented in. Cal is a video game character, and so, naturally, has all the abilities which come with that domain. For example, he can survive being hit with a lightsaber multiple times. This obviously isn't a canonical ability, but a product of the medium. In the same way, the scale and scope of Cal's Force abilities match the setting established in the Fallen Order game universe. In that universe, the game developers made a conscious decision to allow Cal to engage a whole squad of stormtroopers. In the universe of the original trilogy, it was decided to make Luke Skywalker unable to do the same. After all, if he had the abilities of Cal, this whole scene would play out completely differently. Yet Luke is obviously more powerful than Cal, as demonstrated by how each fares against Darth Vader. The power scale of Star Wars is ever-changing, and video games almost always have a very large scale. Rebels presents Kanan on a larger scale than the original trilogy, but the Fallen Order scale is obviously even larger. The problem is, I don't know of any precise metric to say how much larger it is. As such, we're left with educated guesses based on who and what the characters can compete with. I'll certainly explore this aspect more as we progress, but for now, I'm going to look almost exclusively to the cutscenes of Fallen Order for guidance. These are more straightforward as they don't rely on game mechanics and are narrative necessities rather than puzzles and games. As far as I recall, the biggest thing Cal pushes in a cutscene is the Ninth Sister. He does lift heavier creatures and objects in-game, but these will only count as partial credit because gameplay is unreliable. Kanan can easily outmatch this by throwing a troop carrier, but this was when he was especially focused. Kanan's typical feats are usually limited to lifting person-size objects. This does put Cal ahead of Kanan, but not by much. You could even say he was only able to throw the Ninth Sister because he tapped into his emotions, similar to how Kanan was able to throw the Grand Inquisitor when Ezra was threatened.
Oh, angers you. Just wait till the isolation, torture, mutilation, and your dread! I won't let you touch them! You can't stop the Empire! I can stop you.
I will, however, give Cal the benefit of the doubt here because, in-game, though it's unreliable, Cal lifts much heavier objects. But if Kanan centers himself, he would far outstrip Cal's abilities. Defensively, neither Cal nor Kanan has demonstrated much skill. Both are overpowered by a variety of other Force users. To be fair, they never go against people their skill level, but we still don't see much in the way of defense. We do, however, see Kanan able to shield his mind, something Cal is shown unable to do. Now, mental attacks aren't going to come up in this fight, but Kanan's demonstrated superiority in this field is an indication of possible superiority defensively speaking. Regarding enhanced traits such as speed and strength, I'd say it seems Cal is faster while Kanan is more resilient. Both are able to keep pace with Inquisitors, but Cal was able to defeat 2 Inquisitors while Kanan only defeated 1. Pulling a fast one on Maul doesn't count, as that was when Kanan was hyper-focused, something he can't count on being. Once again, Kanan has the potential to be faster, but Cal is more consistent. Although one can win Fallen Order with just kicks, this isn't an indication of his amazing strength, but of some people having a little too much time on their hands. I won't deny that Cal is physically strong, but he doesn't have as significant feats canonically. What's more, Kanan is in his prime while Cal is a teenager for this fight. Kanan has survived torture and being stabbed, and yet continues to fight. Cal did canonically survive being stabbed by a lightsaber, but he wasn't able to get back up into the fight. He was able to desperately smash the glass and swim away, an impressive and clever move, but I'd still say Kanan wins this. Now, I don't see Kanan or Cal winning speed, strength, or resilience by all that much. Regarding their unique abilities, we see things tilt in Cal's favor. Beast control, detecting force sensitives, and resisting mental attacks are all useful, but have very limited combative application. Cal's psychometry is even less helpful, but his force stasis is huge. Cal is able to slow Trilla. Even if this is merely a result of game mechanics and therefore not canonical, it is canonical that Cal can slow a group of clone troopers. As Kanan shows very limited resistance to force attacks, I have no reason to believe he could defend against this. This comparison isn't an easy one to call. Cal certainly has more finesse, I'd even say he's more powerful on average, but Kanan has substantially more raw strength if he can access it. When fully focused, Kanan outclasses Cal in every way by such a huge margin that there's no contest. But it's very rare that he is that focused. As said before, even being in a life-threatening situation isn't a guarantee that he'll go into crisis mode. For this reason, and for the significance of force stasis, I'm giving this one to Cal. Cal Kestis doesn't seem to have a canonical lightsaber form, but seems to primarily use Form 1, that is Shi-Cho. He does, however, implement elements of Form 2 through 5 on rare occasions. Due to being only 12 when his formal training ended, the prominence of Shi-Cho makes sense as it's often used as a beginning form. His variety of other moves suggests that he was learning Niman, Form 6, which draws from the first 5 forms. Although Niman doesn't draw from Form 2, Cal's limited use of such moves doesn't discredit this theory. As Cal had to relearn much of his lightsaber skills, adapting and improvising them, it stands reason that his movements wouldn't match traditional applications of Niman. Fighting Inquisitors, who often rely on Makashi, could be an explanation for Cal's limited use of the form. Cal's occasional use of Jarkai also seems to indicate some understanding of Neimon. Jaro Tapal, using a saber staff, was likely a Neimon practitioner, so it makes sense that Cal was beginning to learn that form. Then, when his training was cut short, he had to rely more heavily on Shicho simply out of familiarity. Alternatively, Cal could only know Shicho, and all other moves interpreted as being taken from forms 2 through 5 are simply improvised, their resemblance being coincidental. After all, he uses a wide variety of moves, including something called Trakata, a technique of turning his lightsaber on and off. In my opinion, this seems more like something Cal stumbled on himself than something Jaro Tapal thought worth teaching. Now, let me pause a moment to rant about Trakata. This is not a clever move. In real-life swordsmanship, there is a move called a disengage which functions in the same way as Trakata. It displaces a blade so that an attempt to knock aside your blade misses. Disengages are one of the core elements of sword fighting, and I really wish they featured more prominently in Star Wars. That means Trakata isn't some brilliant trickery, but a return to base-level swordplay. Again, a disengage is typically taught to beginners. Nor is Trakata superior to a disengage. I'd actually argue that a disengage is a faster and simpler move. Furthermore, it would only work as it does in Fallen Order if the opponent had no idea what she was doing and swung wildly at Cal's lightsaber. A proper duelist would never make such a large and clumsy motion because it would be all too easy to disengage. There are other reasons why Trilla's overextended attack is poor form, but I suppose that's a rant for another day. Again, I must argue within the logic of the universe where, for whatever reason, the incredibly simple concept of a disengage is extremely rare, making Cal's use of it via Trakata significant. But more important than style is what can be accomplished with that style. Cal's most significant victories to date were against Ninth Sister, Taron Malicos, and Trilla Suduri. Unfortunately, these three aren't clearly defined in terms of power. Trilla is shown to be more powerful than the Ninth Sister, but this is the only definitive conclusion we can make. In the realm of speculation, we can get a better idea. From Kanan, there is a strong indication that the Grand Inquisitor is the most powerful of the Inquisitors. He has the most impressive feats of any of them, including besting Jocasta Nu. The Inquisitorius is also an organization created by the Sith. Now, the Sith rule on a basis of martial strength. After all, an apprentice becomes a master by killing his master. Their whole system is based on rewarding power with rank. It would be reasonable to assume, therefore, that an organization they created would function similarly. In fact, Star Wars as a whole typically operates under this system. Think of the Jedi Grand Masters. Although that post doesn't necessitate martial skill, nearly every Grand Master in canon and legends is one of the best Jedi lightsaberists in the Order. Star Wars is based on the principle of knowledge being power. Thus, aging wise men aren't old and frail, but more powerful than younger men in their prime. Rank, age, wisdom, and power are all linked in this universe. True, it's not universal, but it is true more often than not. Again, adding to that how the Sith operate and that the Inquisitorius is a Sith organization, I find it very safe to assume that Trilla, the second sister, is the second most powerful Inquisitor. Regarding Taron Malicos, this is his only appearance I know of, so I can't begin to estimate his powers. I can say, however, that though Cal was overpowered, he was able to keep up with Malicos' blade work. Kanan Jarrus's primary form was Suresu, Form 3. The Grand Inquisitor even said he had an over-reliance on the form. Now, considering the Grand Inquisitor was a master swordsman and was taunting him, this isn't the most reliable comment, yet it fits with Kanan's character. Always looking to survive and to run away, Kanan is very conservative in his fighting style. Yet when provoked or when desperation arises, Kanan relies on Shi-Cho for his offense. This makes sense due to his limited training and the primary position of Shi-Cho in lightsaber students. Kanan also demonstrates skill in Jarkai or some other dual-bladed fencing. I suspect this is self-taught, as Jarkai isn't often paired with Soresu. As with Force abilities, Cal has more tools in his belt, something of a jack-of-all-trades, yet Kanan certainly demonstrates himself more masterful. As said earlier, Cal can barely use the Jarkai style, having only one move at his disposal. Kanan, on the other hand, can fight an entire duel in that style, improvising new techniques as he goes. And while Cal uses moves from a wide range of forms to contend with Inquisitors, Kanan manages the same with a single form. Again, I'd rather be good at one thing than okay at two. So let's look at Kanan's feats to see if his narrower skill set is more finely honed. His most impressive feats are his victories over the Grand Inquisitor and over Maul, but the fight with Maul really shouldn't count all that much. It was under very specific circumstances. One could even say Maul was grossly overconfident to the point of incompetence, seemingly a common occurrence with him. The duel isn't presented this way, as it shows Maul gauge Kanan and take his time, but this feat is so much more impressive than any other feat that it doesn't seem to match Kanan's abilities. Kanan regularly struggles with Inquisitors, yet Maul is able to fight off multiple Inquisitors with seeming ease. I must attribute this success, therefore, to Kanan being one with the Force, having hyper-focus in a crisis scenario. This is also the reason for his victory over the Grand Inquisitor, as in all other duels with him, Kanan is severely outmatched. He often demonstrates lesser skill as he loses against opponents such as 5th and 8th Brother and 7th Sister. As 2nd Sister is likely to be more powerful than these Inquisitors, and as Cal is able to defeat her as well as 9th Sister, Cal is almost certainly a better duelist. Even if Trilla isn't the most powerful after the Grand Inquisitor, it seems obvious that all the Inquisitors aside from the Grand Inquisitor have similar capabilities. Though not definitive, I find it a safe estimation to say that since Cal could beat the 9th Sister, he has a good chance of beating the 5th, 8th, and 7th, something Kanan can't seem to do. And yet, as with the Force, Kanan is very inconsistent. If he is focused, he can defeat the Grand Inquisitor, something I think it's safe to say Cal cannot do. Kanan even outplayed Maul, something I'm sure Cal can't do. Once again, we have the difficulty of the medium to deal with. One could argue that Cal had help in every duel in the Fallen Order game. This is where I think Rico's analysis went astray. Though he said BD wouldn't count, he didn't factor in the impact BD had in Cal's success. Try playing the game without BD's help. I know that's an achievement some have unlocked, but for the rest of us plebeians, I'm not sure that's possible. BD1 is a huge help, but he's also a game mechanic. Star Wars games often have a healing mechanic. Typically, it's either self-healing or stims. Self-healing is easy to translate into canon, as the ability comes from within the character. Finding random med packs and stims lying around are a bit clumsier to deal with, but they aren't narrative devices, so they can be ignored. BD1 can't be ignored. He is his own character and narrative device. If we were to novelize any of the games, the story of the Fallen Order would have to be significantly changed to exclude BD1. So Cal's regeneration doesn't come from a personal power or from the environment. It comes from another character. As this is so, we must treat BD1 and his abilities as separate to Cal and his abilities. After all, Kanan doesn't have Chopper helping him. If BD had helped Kanan, maybe he would have beaten the 5th Brother. So how much does BD help Cal? Again, heals are a standard part of the gaming world, just like surviving multiple shots to the face. As such, their impact shouldn't be taken literally. If you were to novelize the Fallen Order, I don't think Cal would be injecting himself with a stim half a dozen times for every duel. So how reliant would Cal be? In cutscenes, we see BD save Cal twice, so we know he wouldn't have survived if not for the little droid. But I don't see any obvious ways to quantify how much of a help BD is. I do think it's safe to say BD wasn't as helpful as Ezra, whose help still wasn't enough to let Kanan defeat the Grand Inquisitor. And though Ezra isn't that powerful, simply being somewhere between him and better than nothing is too vague for my liking. Unfortunately, I don't know of any way to narrow this down. To solve this, I'm going to say that, as BD is better than nothing, Cal wouldn't have defeated Trilla without him. After all, he lost most of his encounters with her and really struggled when he did win. At his best, Cal seems about even with Trilla, maybe ever so slightly better. So, if he were at a disadvantage by not having BD with him, it makes sense that he would be slightly worse than her. I don't think Cal would lose to Ninth Sister, though, because I'm considering him from the end of the game, while he defeats her much earlier. This is guesswork, but I think he had improved enough from his fight with her to his final duel with Trilla to make up the deficit of not having BD with him. But what does this mean for this duel? If we assume my proposed system of numbers equating to skill, the Ninth Sister is weaker than the Inquisitors Kanan lost to. Yet this still doesn't explicitly say who has the better accomplishment. Besides, though potentially weaker, I don't think Ninth Sister is that much weaker than Seventh Sister. There's a vague jumble of skill levels where all the Inquisitors, Cal, and Kanan seem to fall. After all, though Kanan loses to every Inquisitor he fights when not centered, he has also shown himself better on occasion. I'm thinking specifically when he and Ezra faced off against 5th and 7th. Ezra is clearly not as powerful as 7th Sister, as evidenced later in the series, and 5th Brother seems similarly powered to her. That means Ezra isn't tackling 50% of the opposition. Kanan must fend off an Inquisitor and make up for Ezra's deficit, meaning the fact that these four went roughly even proves Kanan was out fighting an Inquisitor. It's likely that this was partially due to the pressure of responsibility and his effectiveness in working as part of a team, but it's still worth noting that he outperformed an Inquisitor without being perfectly centered. That means, despite the considerable amount of unknowns, we can confidently say Cal and Kanan are extremely comparable. I will, however, give Cal a slight edge because even though he had help, he had some victories, while Kanan was only victorious when pushed into crisis mode. As a Nemon practitioner, Cal can mold his style to the needs of the situation. The customizability of his weapons adds to this so that Cal is often moving from trick to trick. Yet Cal is also a novice who relies heavily on the most basic applications of Chi-Cho. Still, he's proficient in counters and integrating physical blows and force abilities into his lightsaber attacks. His notable defeats are due to being overwhelmed in the Force by Malicos and being outfenced by Trilla. Kanan is unlikely to use the Force anywhere near the level of Malicos, and he's certainly not the duelist Trilla is. Kanan, as a Soresu practitioner, has a strong defense able to keep pace with the Grand Inquisitor for a time. When comparing his defense to Cal's, both were able to withstand powerful Inquisitors' attacks sometimes, while being broken by them others. Cal certainly has the ability to withstand Kanan's strength, as he is able to defend against Ninth Sister. But even an average scout trooper can break through Cal's defenses if he's not careful. As that's true, I think it more likely that Kanan will break through Cal's guard than Cal through Kanan's, but there isn't a huge gap. Besides, Cal is much quicker on his feet while Kanan is rather static, forcing his blade work to do all the defending. Looking to Kanan's defeats, I don't detect a specific flaw in his style. As with Cal, he's typically just outdone by more experienced fighters. One difference in Kanan's defeats is that they often seem to be self-inflicted. Kanan has demonstrated himself to be far more powerful than he lets on, both by defeating the Grand Inquisitor when centered, and holding off 1.5 Inquisitors when protecting Ezra. As stated before, Kanan chooses escape whenever he can, thus he spends most of his skill and efforts trying to run rather than trying to win. This results in many defeats that Kanan would call successes simply because he didn't die. Kanan's hesitation and self-doubt severely limit his combative potential, and as Cal's fighting style is very flashy, incorporating a wide variety of moves, Kanan may assume he's outmatched and look to run instead of win. Even if he decides to stay and fight, he's more likely to take a reserved and defensive pose, allowing Cal to take the initiative. This means Cal will get to experiment, go through his wide range of styles until he finds one that works. But if Kanan fights to win rather than to just survive, the balance of power will quickly flip. Kanan becomes more proactive with the Force and more willing to push an attack. And even though Cal is more ready with a counter, Kanan is no stranger to them. And in the Force, Kanan can bragdoll Cal just as easily as he could the Grand Inquisitor. Should Kanan be centered, or even be as motivated as he was against the 5th and 7th, I see him resisting any attack and pushing through any defense Cal could provide. That being said, I think this scenario unlikely. Narratively speaking, a fight between these two would likely occur over a misunderstanding or rivaling agendas within resistance of the Empire, something like rivalries with Saul. Considering his history on the run, I think Kanan will be far more likely to abandon the fight than dig in his heels. Even if this is Inquisitor Cal, this fight is more likely to end with a retreat rather than a fatality. For this reason, I'm giving Cal Kestis the edge for strategy. As with last time, I'm assigning offensive and defensive values to Cal and Kanan's weapons, powers, and skills. I've translated those values into kills, resulting in a total of 1,000 battles. Whomever has the highest number of kills is the ultimate winner. We'll start off with the weakest abilities and work our way up just to try to make who won a little less immediately obvious. The least deadly ability, which still gets some kills, is Kanan's Beast Control, with 7 kills. Not as skilled as Ezra, nor as reliant on it, I can't give this ability much weight. But Kanan could have anything from a helpful distraction to an easy victory. These aren't allies like BD-1, so I don't see it unfair to say this fight may occur in a place where wild animals are near. After all, both Cal and Kanan encounter a large variety of animals in their usual stomping grounds. Still, I don't see this happening often or Kanan relying on this ability all that much, so I can't give it that much weight. Just above this is hand-to-hand combat, winning Kanan 10 kills and Cal 12. Although Cal is quicker, I think Kanan's strength and durability would make him win most fistfights. He even has a little bit of armor, and again, considering the time periods we're drawing these characters from, Kanan is 28 while Cal is only 17. And since they're both rather equivalently trained in martial arts, I can't see Cal making up that difference. But I scored Cal higher here for the simple reason that he has Force stasis. Although it's plausible that Kanan would be able to resist that, we do know that his Force wall is pretty weak, while Cal is particularly gifted in this ability. I think it likely this will tilt the balance in Cal's favor, as Kanan simply doesn't have a proper defense or response for this ability. A little bump up in significance is Kanan's blaster with 32 kills. Despite Kanan being very skilled with a blaster and it being a very lethal weapon, it has a low score because of how rarely it is used. And though it is true Cal is fully capable of deflecting blaster fire, Kanan was able to put the Grand Inquisitor on his heels for a time. If you think I shouldn't have included this weapon as Cal uses it less and less, you can simply add some or all of these kills to his lightsaber. If he's not using his blaster, that means he's using his lightsaber more. On to the top 4 deadliest abilities. Kanan's telekinesis gains 63 kills, while Cal's gets 110. As stated in my last Versus video, the Force as the Jedi use it typically isn't lethal. Instead, it typically boosts the lethality of other weapons or acts defensively. There are, however, many ways to make telekinesis lethal, especially with terrain. Now, though Kanan demonstrates more raw power, he does so rarely. Cal has more reliable strength. A slight edge, but still an edge. Then, Kanan is more likely to focus on escaping, so will use distraction and stall tactics before aggressive and lethal ones. In a sense, Kanan will be holding back. And, once again, Cal has Force stasis, something Kanan simply can't counter. If Kanan had more aggressive abilities, Cal would be just as vulnerable, but unfortunately for him, he really doesn't. And finally, the top two deadliest weapons are, of course, the lightsabers. Kanan scores a respectable 325 kills, but Cal's earns him the victory with 441. I was really hoping for a better showing from Kanan, but the two fighters are so closely matched regarding skill that style takes the day. All the same reason Cal's telekinesis scored higher apply here as well. Kanan needs something much bigger than himself to find his center and give it his all. Not even every time his friends' lives are in danger is it enough for Kanan to go all out. We see only 3 major instances of this in the Rebels TV series: against the Grand Inquisitor, against Maul, and saving Hera. These 3 instances are all when the stakes are at absolute extremes. Considering who Kanan and Cal are, crafting a narrative where such stakes apply is really tricky. A fight between them isn't likely to happen. And if it does, it's not likely to be lethal. And if it is, it's not likely to have the same ultimate stakes as these other scenarios. Cal isn't going to threaten to corrupt or kill Ezra. He isn't going to awaken an ancient Sith weapon. And he isn't going to threaten the love of Kanan's life. I just don't see Kanan using his full power, which is extremely fortunate for Cal. If he did, I can confidently say Cal wouldn't stand a chance. As it is, Kanan would likely use timid tactics and his preferred Suresu defense. This means Cal would have time to study Kanan's defense, experiment, customize his lightsaber, and use his large array of abilities until he finds the right combination to break through Kanan's guard. As for Kanan, he sometimes forgets about offense altogether, over-relying on defense and retreating. Coupling all this with Force stasis, Cal has the time and skill to break Kanan down. So there you have it. I declare Cal Kestis the victor, winning 563 times out of 1,000. That is, of course, just over 56% of the time. Another really close one which could easily go either way. In a lot of ways, this is more Kanan's defeat than Cal's victory. I think Kanan is clearly more powerful in every way, but his self-doubt and eagerness to run make it clear that fighting is never a priority, even in the middle of a battle. Then again, this is Cal when he's much younger. Canonically, he's only 2 years younger than Kanan. If we narrowed this age gap, could Cal win even against a fully focused Kanan? I guess we'll have to wait until Fallen Order 2 is released. But as it is, this is a battle of sophistication against straightforward power. And this time, Cal has just enough to overwhelm and finesse his way to victory. Those are my thoughts, but what are yours? It's such a close match, it wouldn't be hard to tilt the scale the other way. And what about BD1? How impactful was he in Cal's victories in the game? Let me know what you think. But for now, that's all from me. Thanks for watching.